20,000 are on this mountainside alone. The children are in most danger from the bitter cold and lack of food. Families here feel completely abandoned, in danger of starving to death. Their mothers scavenge for water, which is in such short supply, people are forced to suck the snow to stay alive. The Kurdish refugees are being literally pushed back towards Iraq by Turkish soldiers. Any Kurds who try to get past the soldiers are hunted down. This man was caught and knocked unconscious. Every day, more illness, more disease. This man lost his left arm because of gangrene. Now part of his right arm has also been amputated. This woman is covered in napalm burns, attacked by the Iraqis as she fled. Kurdish doctors say they must have medicines or they won't survive.
All of us will die. Even doctor will die.
The dead remain uncounted. Every morning they carry out those who didn't make it through the night. This 80-year-old man walked for 9 days with no food. He made it to the border only to die of exhaustion. His heartbroken son stayed with him until the end.
If food is not brought in here in a matter of days, food and tents and blankets are the priority, particularly tents and blankets. If that doesn't arrive within a matter of days, now you're going to have deaths in the thousands, I believe.
2 RAF Hercules planes tried to deliver food and medicines today, but severe weather forced them to turn back to their base in southern Turkey. They'll try again tomorrow. When food and blankets do get through, there's anarchy. The gross lack of organisation means so much so desperately needed is being wasted. It's almost beyond belief, and it's almost too late to put a halt to this appalling human catastrophe. Benno Glaser, News at 10, Eastern Turkey.
Exodus, the hemorrhaging of Iraq, a human tragedy on a monstrous scale. All these things have already been said, and yet still they do not adequately describe what is happening here, 10,000 feet up above the snow line, where the two hostile countries meet. But what more can you say to describe these hundreds of miles, families all, who do not believe they brought Saddam Hussein's vengeance on themselves and continue to bring with them a sense of betrayal? But they have not made it to the safe side yet, and possibly many never will. A loudspeaker and gunfire from the Turkish side warns them to stay where they are, that they risk being shot at if they stampede across. Such is the welcome, such is the defiance. The Turkish soldiers hold a thin blue line, a fragile cordon that would not hold if these thousands decided enough was enough. The reason why an army cameraman shot this video was to give the Turkish military and civil authorities some idea of the scale of the problem they are being asked to cope with on their own. Because, and be in no doubt, scenes like this are not confined to this one area. These people are determined to get in whatever the dangers. Numbed by the risk, they travel through any pass, through any minefield along this 200-mile border, unconcerned about the dangers ahead, only looking back at what they are running away from. The Turkish army is containing them in no man's land because the government is frightened of letting them even a few yards into Turkey, fearful that the temporary refugee camps will become a permanent problem.
We can't do for you nothing.
But the general finally agrees, and the sick and their carriers are beckoned up across the valley, across no man's land, into Turkey. babies suffering from lack of milk, for children gangrenous from frostbite, and those who could not manage those final few yards of their long, long journey and died on the slope. Of a sanctuary for the Kurds in northern Iraq, and that would mean sending them back across the mountains they've just crossed. So who will tell them, and how will they respond? And will the international guarantees be enough to persuade them to return to the country they now fear more than this existence and the miserable prospects ahead? Michael Nicholson, News at 10.
20 miles inside Iraq, this is their exclusive story.
People who still believed they were heading for a better place, people who were weak, some of them barely able to walk, but still unwilling to offload the few possessions they managed to escape with. It may be a majestic setting, yet it was hard to conceive how the refugees managed to survive with nighttime about to fall and temperatures diving even lower.
We spent our first night just as the refugees did, high in the mountains in this small settlement. We slept under plastic sheeting, and without the specialist sleeping bags, conditions would have been excruciating. The people say what they really need is practical aid and the ability to come down from these mountains to lower, warmer ground. So far, the only aid that's arrived here are these MREs, meals ready to eat, dropped from the sky by American C-130s. In this pack, corned beef. In this pack, chocolate. But what the people really need is help, practical help, now.
The freezing morning saw the departure of several families heading on for Chukurja, many of the children so tired and so cold they couldn't face another day of walking. During the night, a baby had been born a few yards away from where we had slept. Its parents had given no thought to giving their first son a name. They were too worried about whether they'd survive as a family. But while the day brought new life, there was also the sound of death in the air. In this tent, the father of 12 children had just died. He was 44 years old. He died from hypothermia after falling sick on a long walk to get this far. A doctor could have saved him. His family couldn't. Half an hour later, 2 young men set out to bury their father. Much has now been seen of the refugees' plight. This may seem shocking, but refugees walk on regardless. We moved on again, and another stream of people on the tracks. Some had left Iraq with nothing apart from what they stood up in. Shoes either wore out earlier in the walk or simply got stuck in the mud. Many carried on barefoot. Our first sight of the transit camp from which they were heading was the haze of wood smoke hanging above the valley. We reached this camp in the night, and the people were all talking about leaving the next day because conditions were too bad. One man, a secondary school teacher, had been told by the Turks it would take 2 to 3 hours to get to Chukurja from here. It would, in fact, take his family at least 2 to 3 days. We had to tell them the truth, that they were better off staying here in better conditions until the weather cleared. And even if they did make the walk, the camp at Chukurja had less shelter than this one.
We have been living amongst the refugees for 3 days now, covering over 50 miles and travelling like them on foot. We haven't seen one relief worker yet. Everyone we meet asks for medical aid. Presented with such sights, I wish I was a doctor rather than a journalist. Some ask political questions, and they try and blame President Saddam Hussein, President Bush, Turkey, or the international community. But most ask one simple question, which they say shouldn't involve politics. Please help us now. Andrew Simmons, ITN, Shiurluk on the Turkish-Iraqi border.